who are watching now and in the future. My name is Dave, and today chatting with Amy Marino, and we're going to be talking about a very big topic, healing trauma. Very, very big topic. So Amy is a spiritual counselor. She's a Reiki master. She works with energy of people to help them heal and bring them back into balance, and helps people through a lot of difficult transitions in their life. So thank you, Amy, for being here.
I'm excited.
Yeah, so trauma, this is a very big topic. We could probably go on about this for quite a while.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's just jump right into it. So trauma, how would you, first of all, I guess, how would we define trauma? How would we label that, or just put a definition on it so we can bring it more into clarity? Because it's a very big word that can encompass like
a lot
for sure. Yeah.
I'm pretty much as many people as there are on the planet. There would be that many definitions for, I guess, individual or specific traumas. For me, the overarching definition I guess I would give for it would be anything that is dysregulating for somebody, that a particular event or a thing that happens that puts you out of balance, leaves you dysregulated, or a situation or circumstance that you are living in where you are continuously dysregulated. Like there's just no solid footing for you ever. So
right.
A car accident or some sort of traumatic event, literally traumatic event, something that just leaves you off balance, or living in an environment where you're not seen, or somebody else who hasn't done the work or is very unaware and projecting or using you as an outlet for their own unprocessed or unhealed things going on. That would be an example of a longer term traumatic, and being dysregulated.
Yeah. So I kind of had the same idea in that it can be like one big event that happens, or it can be just, I guess we don't really hear about it or think about it as much, but trauma can sort of be a chronic build over time, where it's just the cumulative trauma of whatever you're going through, especially if it's a toxic situation.
Absolutely.
Can just build and build and build. And in the beginning, it may almost not even seem like a trauma, but all of a sudden one day you wake up and your ability to cope isn't there. And that's where the dysregulation comes in. And I guess the thing about trauma is that it can be very long lasting.
Absolutely.
Right. When life happens and it breaks your ability to cope with life and just regulate and have a happy, harmonious life. The specific thing about trauma is it just can be very long lasting. It's there unless you know how to deal with it. And unfortunately, we're not taught how to deal with it.
and not necessarily equipped with the tools to recognize that it's happening too. Yes. A child growing up in a toxic environment is not going to have, they're not learning from their parents the language to recognize what's going on for them, and they're internalizing it as normal.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of trauma, I also had, there can be trauma like of a specific event or sort of a chronic trauma. I think there can also be sort of karma, trauma for your lineage or your culture that is inherited.
Yeah.
Not just from your specific family, but like the collective group that you sort of most identify with, right? I mean, things like slavery and the Holocaust and like massive events like that leave an imprint, not just on individuals, but on a collective. So I think trauma can definitely be sort of related to, I don't know if lineage is the correct word, but yeah, definitely your culture for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, where like one specific example would be like people who lived through the Great Depression and their children live a life of scarcity, or that there's not enough, or and it's not necessarily that they live through it, but it's in the cells of their parents, and it, like, you are made up of half of each of your parents. Like things like that just get passed along. Bit of a tangent here, but similar to like if someone gets an organ transplant and they start having interest in things or different things coming up, but it's like they're taking on what was in the body of that other person. Like there's things we carry that are not just cognitive, something in your brain that you can. like trace and recompute and change. So
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think that's it, right? Is we all, when we're born, we're born into a lot more than we realize, and
absolutely.
that just imprints upon us culturally, from our family, even just energetically, like everything. There's a lot more that we carry with us than most of us realize,
Yeah. Well, how
right?
many stories? I'm not sure actually if you hear many of these stories. I've heard a couple of these stories of twins separated at birth. They find each other later in life, and how many similarities in their lives when they grew up in completely different environments. So the whole nature versus nurture, I'll say argument, but
Right.
ideology, I guess. So
Yeah, yeah. And then for trauma as well, I did have also trauma tied to karma,
mm,
which is maybe a little bit different as well, that we don't hear
it's
about.
true because it rhymes.
Yeah, and we can maybe get into that a little bit later
Mm.
in the next when we're talking about it in one of our future questions. But I think there are some events that people sort of have to go through for a
Mm.
part of their soul growth and their soul development.
Yeah, interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's just, your soul knows about it, and might be one of the main reasons why your soul chose this incarnation and this existence. And your soul sees where it's going to take you. But we as individuals, especially if we don't have that connection to our spirit, oh man, it can really blindside us, right? And we can just not know why.
And
Um,
it's not a solo journey either. I'm not sure if it's necessarily relevant here, maybe in a later question too, but there was a documentary that came out not too long ago, focusing on Gabor Mate's work. Like he's huge in the trauma world. I very much enjoy his perspective and how he looks at it, particularly with addiction. But one of the things he had said in regard to trauma, like childhood trauma or with children, that it's not necessarily the event itself that is traumatizing, it's being left alone with it. So
yeah,
never being able to process it. So the event itself or the environment itself is traumatizing, and then never having the opportunity to have it acknowledged or processed or validated or engaged with is also, it's another layer of the trauma. Like how often do you hear of parents of like, you know, I don't remember that, or that never happened, or that's not true, or stop crying, you're not upset. And that is invalidating the person's trauma, where you can have something. I know one of the questions we have is just why some people engage with it differently. So it might be more
yeah.
relevant at that point of our conversation. But
Well, that's a perfect segue, I think.
okay.
So yeah, yeah. So let's bridge right into that. So two people experience the same event. One person comes out of it traumatized, and the other person maybe gets rattled and shakes it off, or doesn't even notice. Like, why do some people sort of respond or react differently? Why do some people get traumatized by the same event? Why does it take one person, like, to experience a great deal of pain before it makes them traumatized, and other people maybe not so much? Because I
Right.
guess trauma can be sort of relative to the individual, and what their sort of capacity is, right?
Yeah. Did you have something to
Yeah,
say?
so no, that's it. Yeah, so that's the question. Why do you think?
I feel like there are multiple avenues that you can take on that particular thing. So I
Yeah,
would imagine the same way siblings growing up in the same home can have very different personalities or experiences of who their parents were or what life was like growing up that way. People experiencing a particular, let's go with the example of an event. So people experiencing a particular event, um, it could come down to what that event meant to them. Like what parts the person took in. So, you know, did people get hurt, or I'm trying to organize my thoughts here. So
yep,
I think someone like myself, I love the idea of being a paramedic or a firefighter to help people. I very much believe that I am here to be of service. I think firefighters, paramedics, all that, like what a beautiful way to be of service. But I could not handle, after my first day of work, I wouldn't be able to go back because I personally could not handle what I would see. Like I would work for one day and then need a year of therapy to go
right.
back for another shift.
Yeah,
There's men and women out there or people out there who are doing this day after day after day. Um, I couldn't tell you what the difference is. And it could depend on who's in their lives too. Maybe they do have a support team where it's not being internalized or taken home or taken personal, that it's, I hate to say enough, but it's enough for them that they did the best they could in that moment. Where myself, if I couldn't help that person, I wouldn't, I don't know what I would do about it. I'm not sure that I could come back from that. So I feel like that's part of it too, of just the different people, like the same way you have different tastes in food and different tastes in music, you have different tolerances for what you're going to see or encounter in life and what it means to you. And then where you're at in your own development as a person too, where, you know, are you defined by external events or are you not? Like, these sort of things can come in too, where something happening feels very personal, internalized, and a part of your identity, something happening to you, where another person is like, well, here's an event that happened to me, but I am separate from the event, where someone else may not be separate from the event. And not right or wrong, it's just different. And then depending on the community too, going back to that quote of, you know, not necessarily the event that happens, but being left alone with it. If you are coming from a life history of being very loved and supportive, having a major event like that won't have you feel unsafe in the world, where somebody else who doesn't have a history or a reference to a safe landing spot, it's going to be more dysregulating to have the perception of chaos in the world, because you don't have anywhere safe to go, and it just became more dangerous now.
Right. Yeah. So definitely a couple key points there. The support network for sure.
Mm-hmm.
For someone being alone versus someone who has a network, even if it's just friends. That's definitely helping the capacity. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, I think there's definitely, there's not one single factor which determines a person's response to trauma. The other, I think it's definitely a whole bunch of things. I think everybody has sort of an inherent sort of emotional intelligence and capacity to cope that varies from individual to individual.
Absolutely.
For sure. I think there's actually a conditioned response to stress inherited from the family. And I know, at least from some families that I can think of, that the immediate response to stress from some of the parents were always hyperactive, very anxious, full of anxiety, full of worry, full of catastrophizing. Like that was this typical response to stress. And that can imprint on the kids. Like if you got young kids that just aren't aware of that, and that's just how they see. So I do think there is maybe a conditioned response that people may have to look into to see, you know, how they're responding in a certain way. And if you connect that to maybe your conditioning when you grow up, I think that can help a lot. I actually think vitality plays a big role in this. I think people that are just weakened over time through lack of sleep and really poor diet, and they're not doing anything to help themselves physically. When your body is tired, like emotions always come to the surface anyways, and usually not in a good way. That coping capacity goes down when people are chronically tired. And if someone's chronically worn out, I think that's not helpful. And then I think along with that is just a lot of people just live in a constant state of fight or flight.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of stress in life. And if you're kind of working just to barely pay the bills, or you're in debt and you've got kids to feed and you don't know where your next meal is coming from, or when you're going to pay your next rent bill, like all that stuff, when you're in fight or flight, that sort of skews your perception, but makes it more difficult to cope
For sure.
With whatever is presented in front of you. I mean, if you're already at your limit because of that, then any little small thing can sort of set you over the edge, right?
Yeah, I just saw the image of like when a glass is so full that it almost like bubbled over the top, and literally one more drop can make the whole glass spill over. Like,
Yeah.
if you're so perfectly balanced, and something like someone cutting you off, or your fridge breaking, or a pipe bursting, or your friggin' belt loop getting stuck on a doorknob, like, these things feel huge and can really throw you off and send you into that state of dysregulation where somebody else would be like, that's your problem, like that's what's wrong for you. But it's not necessarily the one specific thing, it's all of it.
Yeah, it's all of it. Yeah. And then the last thing I had was just again, going back to the spirituality part of it, the connection to spirit. I think some people have a greater connection than others,
Mm-hmm.
and can draw a measure of strength from that.
I feel like that would tie into what I was mentioning before about that sense of safety in the world. Like,
Yeah.
Not that you have to believe in something bigger than you. I do feel, though, that people who do believe in something bigger than them, whether it's the universe or their higher self or God or whatever the word is, just something bigger than you, insinuates you have this belief of something or somebody looking out for you, that you're not alone, that you're not
Right.
like on your own.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, I'll just give an example with my wife. I mean, when she was younger, she was very poor. She ran away from home because of some problems that were at home. And then when she left, she was very poor and didn't know where her next meals were going to come from. And she was just barely scraping by. And like, she could have come out. I mean, she's a pretty fantastic person, but any other person could have come out in, very, very sort of screwed up from those experiences. And I've asked her, what helped you get through that? And that's what she said. She said, I always felt like I had some guidance.
Mm.
She said there was always something guiding me. Do this, here's the next step. Do this, here's the next step. And I think for me, that's what I had when I was going through my depression. There was a level of guidance that I was getting that I didn't really give credit to at the time.
Mm-hmm.
That I was following just these little intuitive nudges. So I think spirit and soul are always talking to us and always sort of trying to get us in the right direction. But it's just, if we don't have that connection, or we're just not aware of the connection,
Yeah.
or actually, I mean, I wasn't even really aware of the connection, but I was at least following it. So I mean, if you're just
Yeah.
not following that, I think that can sort of shift the scales from one way to the other.
Yeah.
In terms of how you sort of move forward in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else there with why some people are affected differently, or?
Nothing that's coming to mind at this exact time.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of healing and recovering and processing and moving forward, obviously there's no one set way.
Yeah. I feel like that's the answer to every question we have.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we were to give a step-by-step scenario, that still would only work for like a few, but it wouldn't work for a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah.
So maybe we can just talk about general ways or things people can do to sort of get the healing process going, even or any specific techniques that you know of as well.
Yeah. I feel like it's relevant to say too, I'm not sure if you said it just now or if it was part of our pre-live conversation, just about the different stages where it is going to feel, I would imagine it's going to feel quite triggering for people to think that there needs to be a purpose to their trauma, that it's something to heal, or that it's just something that if you're in it, in what is happening, like, you don't fix the shingles on your roof while the tornado is ripping by. Like,
Yeah.
it's not the time.
Yeah.
I do feel like it's important to say that, like, the ultimate goal might not be healing the trauma. It may just be getting through it, like just weathering the storm, where
It just might be enduring.
Yeah, like,
yeah, just endure.
yeah, there's space for that too. And I feel like it's important to note that, where, if we're talking about these healing things, it's maybe not dismissing, but almost ignoring this whole demographic of like, well, just work on your healing, even though you're starving and like you're freezing cold, and, think about all the great things like that. may not be relevant when,
Yeah.
yeah. I just wanted to say something about that.
Yeah. So maybe if I can just like sum that up, just be very important to acknowledge where you're at.
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to be somewhere you're not, if you're trying to feel good
Yeah.
and be healed and be at the other end, healing can be at like years.
It's like putting cement shoes
Yeah.
on yourself when you're trying to push a boulder uphill. Like, you're trying to push a boulder uphill, don't add more things. Like, just, if you need to focus on getting through each day, like, that's where you're at, and
Yeah.
that's where your healing's at. And it's not wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. It's not like bad or lesser than in any sort of way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think sort of the way I look at trauma is that it can create a fracture in someone's mind and create sort of a wall or a division where you might be behaving in a normal way, and then all of a sudden the trauma arises that's coming from like it's not a separate aspect of self, it's still a part of you, but it's a part of you that's sort of disconnected and responds in a different way. The way I look at it visually is imagine, to me, a trauma, like energetically, is a sun turning into a black hole. So the trauma is the explosive event where the sun goes nova, and the energy is very expansive because there's a lot of energy being sort of coming up. But then if the response, as a protective mechanism, because the mind has to protect itself, right, from damage, it will sort of wall that off, and all the energy sort of contracts. The way I look at it in the body is you get these little sort of areas of contracted dense energy that are like little black holes. And each of those is representative of whatever trauma or pain.
Yeah.
Right, Eckhart Tolle calls it the pain body. And so each of those, I think, just from a general term, they have to be sort of faced and embraced and released. And I guess the catch word here is to heal it. You got to feel it, right? But unfortunately, feeling it really, like, it's just so fucking uncomfortable. Sometimes there's only so much you can bear of it, right?
Right.
And so
sometimes working with clients, part of my when I'm meeting them for the first time, usually in the first or second session, one of the things that come up is that it might get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But sort of the way that I see that is, it's if the residue is within you still, and like that little black hole is still in there, and there's some pain that you're holding on to, or it's just not being released because your mind is guarding, or a part of you just doesn't want to let it go. It's like the person has to feel safe to be able to let that come to the surface and let it out.
Absolutely.
So in terms of the healing process, it's whatever scenario you can find for yourself that makes you feel safe.
Yes.
To do that.
With the absence of a timeline.
Absolutely, yeah. I think putting an expectation on the time can really actually screw up the process, right?
Yeah.
Emotions heal at their own sort of way and time. So in terms of that, in terms of helping people sort of bring something that's not comfortable to the surface and helping them letting it go, is there any sort of methods or ways you can talk about that help and sort of facilitate that process?
Definitely being realistic in the sense of, like we were saying, it could get worse before it gets better, and taking stock, or what's it called? I can't think of the word that I want, but of the resources that you have that you may not be aware of, where, I have nowhere to go and no one to talk to. Okay, maybe not friends or family, but there's other services or things available. And, are you running into barriers of pride or thing where some things do exist for help, but is there something of like, well, what are people going to think if I do this or if I go here? Like, taking inventory was the word I wanted.
Right. Yeah.
Just inventory of, kind of get the lay of the land, but before you're trying to do anything or power through it or make this huge to-do list, take an inventory of what is going on. Like, where actually are you? So if you need to start where you are, where are you? Take a second, look around. What are the beliefs that you have about your current situation and your conditions and the people who you have supporting you. Just a personal story for myself. When I was first going through my separation, I felt like I had nowhere to go, that I didn't have friends or people to support me. I thought like, holy shit, like, what am I going to do? And the way my family showed up for me in ways I didn't realize I had the love and support that I had, because I had decided that I didn't. And it was very uncomfortable, and we had some blowouts, and it was very healing for at least my relationship with my parents specifically. It's completely shifted for me, where like I could not have made it through that time without them. And that wouldn't have been something I thought beforehand, that like, oh, my mom and dad will help me. Like that wouldn't. So what I'm trying to say is that where you're at and you're thinking, things that you don't have, or resources that you don't have, or options that you don't have. And the most difficult thing is to ask.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Be open to being surprised. Like, you never know who can show up for you, or what ways a person can show up for you. But that being said, it's terrifying too, to put yourself out there, where if you're gushing blood from every major artery and you need to extend yourself to ask for help, where a no could be the cut that kills you, it gets risky. Like, you're going to die if you don't.
Yeah, you're going to bleed to death if you don't.
Yeah.
In that situation,
Yeah. So I think if you're dealing with trauma and you've gotten to a place mentally or emotionally where you feel like you want to do something different about it, or feel differently about it, or be having a different experience, where like that point where it's just something has to change. Something has to change. You have to do something different than the way you've been doing it. So if you keep holding on to everything you believe to be true, thinking that's going to carry you through the future, it will not.
Yeah, the pain will only magnify.
Right. It brought you to where you are.
Yeah.
So take stock of where you are and where do you want to go? Well, I'm here, and these are all the things I believe to be true, but I want to be here with those things being true. Okay, well, how do you get there? Like, do you need help from another person? Is there stuff you can do on your own? Did something shift by just being aware of what's around you, by taking that second to like put your head up and look around, of like, oh, I didn't realize I was even going in this direction when I was trying to go in that direction.
Right.
There has to be that, I think, that moment of self-awareness or self-reflection of what's even going on in the first place. Like, what's happening.
Yeah, for sure. The self-reflection, the self-awareness as key, for sure. I think once a person, I think we were talking about this earlier, is just maybe also being open to different modalities.
Mm-hmm.
If your things aren't moving forward, then maybe there's another way.
For sure.
Being open to that, right? Yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
And how that could challenge your beliefs and values and things. So you're talking about what we were talking about in our little
Yeah. I just want to expand on that.
Yeah. So there's the basic, or not basic, but I guess the more common, like therapy, support groups, different. There's so many resources that exist in like municipalities and provincially and like across Canada, and like to help and support. And there's like the alternative medicines, I guess I should say. Anything could serve as medicine. So we were specifically mentioning about plant medicines. So again, just a personal story for myself. I had 2 different experiences with people trained to be prescribing, I guess, and administering these plant medicines and working with people in that sort of way. That might be something that somebody's very closed off to, or very challenging. It can, how do you put words to an experience like that? I'm trying to articulate what I want to be saying. That kind of blows the lid off of things, and may not, like, at least for myself, it was one of the most incredible things that could have happened for me, where somebody else having the lid blown off like that, if they don't have a safe place to bring those things back, it could be re-traumatizing.
It could be, yeah, for sure.
That sort of thing. Or if you're going with somebody who's not properly trained to support, or, we're just trying to get fucked up. Like,
Right.
You absolutely will.
Yeah.
And it's quite dangerous when you're dealing with people's psyches, especially if you're getting into the deep psyche and, calling on unconscious things that we're doing too. Like, it's not to be taken lightly. It's not a game, or like, it's some deep shit for people that you can be pulling up and pulling out. So for myself, I was fortunate, just my background and what I do, I have a circle of people like that, where, including yourself, where I can have conversations about things where other people can't get past the point or past the fact of like, oh, plant medicine, like I'm stuck there. Like, you're doing drugs. Like, I don't want to hear about it. Like, and like not being able to have the conversation about the deep and profound thoughts, realizations, like healings, things that come up where, again, it goes back to the specific person and how your life is set up and what you have going on, and knowing who to trust for somebody like that. Like, if you're putting yourself in a situation where you potentially do not have control, like you're surrendering or submitting control to a substance or somebody else, like that's a huge risk too, because there are unsafe people who take advantage of people in that sort of way. Yeah, I don't know if I answered that.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of, sort of healing modalities and expanding your horizons, it doesn't have to be that. It can be anything. For me, it was meditation. Before I was not a meditator, I had no self-awareness. I thought meditation was stupid. And I mean, I did see a few, therapists to help me to get through what I was going through. And it turned out for me that meditation was one of the best things I could have ever done. So just being open to avenues of healing, that, when it makes you feel safe to express whatever needs to be expressed, regardless of what society says it has to be open to trying other things, for sure. I think once people feel safe to express, I do think everybody has a sort of preferred modality of expression, if that makes any sense. I think for some people it's vocal, for some people it's creative, like for some people it's art. For some, I know for myself especially, it's movement, because emotions are just energy stored in the body, and like, to deal with emotions, you have to deal with the body in some way or another, right? Even though they're created by the mind, they're stored in the body. And I didn't realize, at least when I was younger, when I was just like full of anger all the time, I just had this intuitive sense that whenever I worked out, I felt better because that was my outlet.
Yeah.
I found a way to get all of that anger out of me without hurting anybody or hurting myself.
Yeah.
And that was my channel of expression. So, I mean, later on, maybe just in the last couple of years, it's turned into writing. I think it's sort of changed, but I think everybody has a different vehicle of expression that works better for them.
And it can change and evolve.
And it can change. Yeah, absolutely. So I think finding, because I wasn't emotionally aware enough to sort of point my finger at that and say, this could have helped me. Even though exercise and movement was helping me, I didn't know it was helping me. But finding your avenue of most comfortable expression and just exploring that and finding ways to get it out that way, because that ball of like black, dark, dense energy within you, that has to be sort of come up and it has to be released and it has to be purged. And I know the purge isn't comfortable, right? It's like food poisoning. You purge, it feels awful when you do it, but then afterwards you actually feel a little bit better once it passes, right?
Yeah.
So it's just finding a safe outlet to get whatever pain or grief or shame or sadness or whatever, anxiety, anger, like any emotion, just finding a way to release that in a safe way over time. I think so. Just knowing what your method of expression is, I think, can help a lot, for sure.
And like you said, being willing to try things. Like for myself, I started out in the fitness industry and then really enjoyed the mental, emotional aspect of just talking with clients, and then went that route, and then started to become more aware of what I'll call the spiritual part of it. And that's what got me into the energy work and the energy healing, where there's some people who are quite left brain and are not interested in that at all. And I do have clients who specifically say to me, I don't want to do any of that stuff. I just want to do the things over here. I'm like, okay, well, us talking, there's like an alchemical thing happening.
Yes.
Regardless, I'm not secretly doing things with these people, but just us talking is shifting things for people too. But then also taking ownership of having an impact on people. Like when I first started the energy work, I'm like, how am I going to talk to people about this without them thinking I'm some like space cadet wacko? I'm like, well, that wasn't my experience of it. And I found people who were able to, I was able to connect with, where I felt safe with them, of like, okay, they're not being like, well, I can clear your curses for $10,000.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is important too. And then something else I was thinking of when you were talking is finding your outlet, but also knowing your audience. So just because you're ready to speak about it or write about it doesn't mean that everybody is safe to be on the receiving end of that. So I'm thinking of a specific example of, someone wanting to share something with me, but the relationship was traumatic. I was not the audience for what needed to be processed or shared. Like, it was better with a therapist or a partner or somebody in their life, not like it would have been re-traumatizing to engage in that sort of way.
Right.
So if you let's say you have something going on with your parents and you finally have clarified your thoughts of what you want to say to them, your parents might not actually be the audience to process your shit with your parents about.
Yeah.
It may be better served with a partner, with a therapist, or just because you have it clarified, or you have a sense of what it is, or you want to work with that person, they may not be capable. And it would be re-traumatizing to come with this package and they like smack it out of your hands and it's like, I don't want it.
Yeah, I mean, your trauma might trigger them, and that their own trauma that they may not even be willing to look at, right? So,
and like is it transference or countertransfer too? Like, if it was a toxic or traumatic relationship for both people, like if they're doing their own healing from their relationship with you, they're not going to want to work with you to be processing your relationship with, like, it's just. I'm not to say it's impossible or you can't ever get there. It just might not be, just because you're ready.
Yeah.
And not that has to be a goal to be ready. Like, it may just not ever be appropriate. And
no. Yeah.
Part of the journey was to, there was a client I had recently and just talking about summer isn't a failure because it's fall. The season is just over. Like, so what that person had to teach you from being in your life, the season is done. Like, next season. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So is there anything else in terms of just like tips or tools or methodologies or anything? I mean, did you ever try like breath work or Gestalt therapy or like any other like specific modalities that kind of? So
in the training for like the school that I went to, we did so many different types of, so there was like CBT, different types of talk therapy, breath work, like meditation. But I was fortunate in the sense that I did have that, I guess, index of things to draw upon, of things to try, and I knew what resonated for me and what didn't. But for somebody else who isn't in the field of like mental health, like, where do you even start? I feel like it's the same thing as like the 12 steps thing, is like, you first have to admit that you're an alcoholic, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not to say that so colloquially, like, it's a very serious thing to get to that point.
It is. Yeah.
So if you are realizing that, hey, you know what, I think I've experienced trauma and it's affecting my life, that is a huge step to begin with. And then, it could be overwhelming because there's so many different avenues to go, and people want to get into therapy and don't realize, hey, you can shop around for therapists. If you find a therapist and you go for the first session and you didn't feel slightly better leaving, you can go to a different therapist. You don't, like, you're not locked in. Like you were saying before about the safety thing, like you are inviting somebody into the deepest, possibly most shameful, darkest places of yourself. And if you feel like that person is walking around with dirty shoes, you are allowed to not invite them.
Yeah.
And there's not a one size fits all. Somebody that might feel like sandpaper on my soul will be the most healing thing for somebody else. And fucking great, cool. I don't like the taste of all foods. I don't like you can't predetermine what's going to be medicine for somebody. So yeah, I feel like there would almost have to be some sort of, just get curious about, start researching all the different things you could do for trauma, or the possibilities, or, there's self-help books. If you don't know where to start, head to a library, head to a Chapters or Indigo, and just head to that section. And, what speaks to you? What was your eye drawn to? What title kind of grabs you? Start there. That'll give you some insight. And then, they might reference something in the book, or you overheard a conversation and it intrigued you, or, when I try different practitioners, it sounds kind of, I don't know, but how I feel based on their pictures, like energetically.
Yeah.
That's a common thing. Yeah. I've had clients say the same thing to me, is I saw your picture and, felt good or something like, and then I'm sure there's people who have come across my website that I've never heard from because they saw my picture and decided, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That going to the bookstore and the self-help was one of my main avenues in the beginning, specifically because I just did not want to share my issues with other people, right? I was too ashamed to, but it got me thinking, and it got me investigating, and it got me curious, and it got me exploring in a way that was safe.
Yeah, for sure.
Until I was ready for the next level. And when you're ready for the next level, you might get those intuitive nudges, or you'll just feel like you can, handle a little bit more. Okay, so through the process of healing, which can, of course, take a long time, like we said, we shouldn't put time limits on this. Is there any sort of like stages or phases that a person have you seen go through with some of your clients, or just in general?
I feel like, I don't know if you've seen these memes where it's like how you thought it would go and then how it actually goes.
Right. Yeah.
So I really like I don't even know if it's an analogy, but kind of the saying that your growth and your healing is not linear, like it's cyclical, but it's a spiral going up. So you might be returning to the same things, but you're returning to them with a higher and different perspective. So yes, it's the same thing, but you're getting to see it differently, and you have different tools now that you didn't have the first time. I just blanked on what the question was.
Just sort of stages of the process, maybe.
Right. There's going to be times where you're in the flow of it and everything's clicking and you're healing and you're feeling so great, and you're taking these risks and they're paying off, and like you're feeling the expansion and the growth, and then boom, you hit a wall and you feel like you're back where you started, and everybody, like, nobody can be trusted, everybody's out to get you, and whatever the when you were talking about it being stored in the body and there being residue there, like these things will come up, and it's if any part of your mind or brain or anywhere can hold on to the fact that it's coming up because it feels safe to come up, to keep that in mind, where you'll feel like you're going backwards, but you're actually making progress, because these things wouldn't be coming out if they didn't feel like you were capable or ready to be dealing with them. Like if you were not capable, they would still be in lockdown and in your unconscious, silently controlling your life from behind the scenes. So I view it kind of as like, it's coming up so that it can move along. So again, I can only speak from my perspective of dealing with things. It's almost a bit of a reassurance in that regard of like, okay, this is frustrating, it's uncomfortable, and I feel myself wanting to react in these particular ways when I would normally respond in these particular ways. At the same time, I know this is coming up because I'm ready to engage with it in a way that I would not have been able to engage with it before. So here's the lighthouse of where I'm trying to go in my life. And if that's where I'm headed, how would that person respond to what's going on right now? But that's not necessarily something that you could do at the beginning when you're trying to figure out where the hell your lighthouse is in the first place.
Yeah.
And you won't always remember all the time. Sometimes I'll react in a way that is not favorable to me or not going to take me in the direction of where I want to be going. And then I can come back to it. And then there's an opportunity for healing and humbling myself of like, oh, hey, you know what? I responded to you in a way that was this, or, if I could do it over again, I'd want to do this, or even just taking more time in general, not feeling like I need to respond in the moment. I feel like a big part of healing with trauma is just slowing down and making space for yourself too. If everything's right up in your face and you're trying to deal with it all, like you're not going to be able to. And there will be times where it's easier and times when it's not. It's not A to B, nice straight clear line of like, well, this is what I want to do and here's where I'm going. And it will be like that sometimes. And then what's that game? Snakes and Ladders.
Yes.
Like, oh, you're winning, you're ahead, and then boom, snake at the beginning.
Yeah. The way I kind of look at it, it's just from because I have a long-term perspective now on things that I just because I'm so much older than I used to, I could see maybe things that I didn't see previously. It's almost like, when you have those metal balls on a string and you pull one and then it hits the metal balls and then the reaction goes the other way and then the reaction goes the other way.
Yeah.
I think in general over time, it does happen that way. You'll polarize back and forth to one side or the other.
Yeah.
But the polarity will slowly decrease over time as whatever comes up, like you said, when you're ready. It wouldn't be coming up unless you were ready to express it and deal with it. Mm-hmm. Every time you release a little bit of that emotion that's stored in the body, that decreases how far the pendulum swings to the other side. And so there's this natural, I almost see it as self-regulating process to a certain extent, not 100%. Yeah. But every time you release something, the way I look at it is the emotions are sort of the glue that hold beliefs together. Mm-hmm. And when you release those emotions, the belief systems along with those emotions also just kind of evaporate, and that makes room for a new perception or a new way of being to sort of come in and replace the old one. And every time you adopt a higher perception of how you see things, that pendulum just doesn't swing too far to either side. So when you do have bumps on the road or issues, they're just not so extreme anymore, I guess. Mm-hmm. And that sort of happens over time. But in general, I notice I'm just picking off what you said there exactly. You said there's lockdown. Definitely there are times of lockdown, especially in the beginning. Even people may not be aware of how their trauma is running their life from the background.
Yeah.
And then after the lockdown, I noticed there's just this extreme polarization where you oscillate back and forth between things just blurting out and coming up because you don't have, you can't suppress it anymore.
Right.
Even if there's a surface level of awareness of something, then that's enough for it to come up. And then you try and lock it down again, and then it comes up, oscillate. And then from at least what I've seen is that after that, there's this phase where you just kind of sink down into this dark night where it's just like black all the time. and you just, it's the most densest energy that's clearing from your system, I guess. Like energetically, that's kind of how I look at it, is the most, when that black hole forms, like the deepest, densest structured energy that's related to that belief system is starting to emerge. Like it just, you go into the depression and the point of this is that's where the addictions can really kick in, right? Which we can talk about next, I guess, which is the barriers where people get stuck, is looking for too much dependence on external medications. But then, after that, the trap there for people is that they think the dark night is going to last forever. Mm-hmm. That's one of the biggest mind traps I think people can get caught into when you're really, really in that deep, dark state, is that this is just always going to be that way, but it's not. Yeah. It's just, it's just a purge and a purification. And if you could know at least there's an end to it, then like you said earlier, this is where I'm at. All I can do is endure.
Yeah. And every storm eventually runs out of rain.
Yes, exactly. So it does that pendulum does sort of level itself over time. But then over time, over years, once you sort of get all the emotions out and the belief systems start to reorganize, there's sort of a phase, at least for me, I noticed, where you just go through reintegration.
For sure.
It's almost like a new self is being emerged or born out of all of that suffering.
Yeah.
And when you integrate, the more you can integrate that, the less that pendulum swings to the other side. It's still going to be there because it's just life, right?
Sure.
We live in duality, but just looking at a long-term perspective, those are kind of like general phases. But like you said, it was just things are just up and down.
Yeah.
But they come up. When they come up, just know they're coming up for a reason, right? Because you can handle it. I think what you said there was amazing. Okay, so where do people get stuck on the process?
Oh, fuck. Everywhere. Like anywhere. If you can't, like, just what's popping into mind, if you can't get out of the traumatic place, or you're not able to complete a cycle or close a loop on something that's happening where it's just something repeating.
Right.
Something we used to talk about in our calls a while ago, just about the manifesting freedom, that people talk about wanting freedom, but true freedom is terrifying, because then you need to be, if you are truly free, you need to be accountable for absolutely everything. And
responsibility for sure.
Yeah, like the level of responsibility and accountability that comes with being truly free. I'm not sure humans have the capacity for that, to be completely accountable for all of it. So there's a certain level of accountability that needs to happen, where there have been traumatic events. I want to be very careful in how I say this. So there have been traumatic events and relationships in my past, but to put myself in the position of being solely a victim is unfair, because I participated. I was a participant in what was going on too. Like how I didn't always, specifically for me, I did not always recognize that I had choice in how I was reacting or responding to different things going on, and taking accountability, and sometimes too much accountability. But that was part of the healing journey for me too, is allowing myself to take on responsibility that wasn't actually mine. And that was part of the processing too, of like finding myself, I guess, or
you want to acknowledge even if it's something you weren't aware of that you were doing at the time, or just really clueless, you want to own that, but you don't want to blame yourself either.
For sure. Yeah. Or get stuck in that feeling of blame of, there's a light and shadow to everything. And sometimes there's stuff we're going to have to look at about ourselves that we don't like. And it's not necessarily that it's a bad thing. Just know that about yourself, so that if these things are getting triggered or wanting to come up, you'd be like, oh, that's that part of myself. Yeah. And when that part of myself comes up, it's because it has these needs or it wants this. So here's how you engage with it or take care of it to help it get those needs met, so that it doesn't start pulling the strings on your life and blowing up shit that it doesn't need to be blowing up.
Yeah. No, I definitely think, as we talked about earlier, people can get stuck on just not accepting it, right? If the more you resist whatever happened, try and push it down, that's obviously a huge barrier for sure. Acceptance is key. But I think people can really get stuck in the blame game, especially if it's someone else specifically that caused them pain.
Yeah.
If you're always pointing the finger at that person, even though they did have a part to play in it, but if you're always pointing the finger at that person and you're not looking within at your own stuff,
right?
And then I think people can just sort of spin themselves in circles, and like you said, have those repetitive behaviors and situations and reactions just habitually happen over and over again.
I don't remember who said it, but it's like anytime you point your finger, like remember there's 3 pointing back at you. So,
right.
Yeah.
So I think that's where a lot of people can get stuck is just looking too much outside of them, and also vices for sure, of course, right? Because
Mhm.
it is not comfortable.
Yeah.
And just, people want to self-medicate. And I think that's what we're taught as a society, right? I mean, everything is instant gratification, feel good now.
Yeah.
Here's some junk food, here's some booze, here's some pharmaceutical medications,
Mhm.
or whatever. Not, for some people that might be part of their process, but in the end, it's very easy to build dependence
Mhm.
on
And
those
it's information too. Like I find, so if I'm working with clients who have addiction with any sort of thing, like to not vilify it and view it as information of like there's
right.
something so difficult and challenging that I'm using very general words, but essentially to escape from through these different vices, as you said, like in the moment, that is medicine, because if you weren't drinking the drink or taking the
Right.
supplements, you could possibly implode on yourself. So not to vilify like, fuck, I want to quit doing this, or I hate that I do this, or I hate that I do this. Be aware that also that thing is saving your life. Like,
It is.
and it may be hurting other people in your life too. Like it's not cut and dry, like super clear. Like there are so many different, like it's such a intertwined web of different things going on. Um, and when you're unraveling it, like we cannot vilify the things that we're doing, like to help ourselves cope and survive and like get through, endure life. Like, and for sometimes in years, possibly decades for some people, it is all it's going to feel like is that you are just enduring something so terrible. And other times it may feel like you're more of a curator of your life, and that you have more control almost in regard to the experience that you're having. But sometimes if you have to surrender that to something else, like I remember it was you actually when we worked at the Granite, you had said to me one time, we were talking about food, and it was about like my sweet tooth and like the disgusting amount of junk I could eat in the evening time. And you had said something about an Oreo. This is my version of it, maybe not exactly what you had said, but it was something like, if I don't want the Oreo, but I can't stop myself from eating it, you're saying in that moment, I'm giving my power to the cookie. I am making it bigger than me. And you're like,
Yeah.
it's a fucking Oreo cookie. Like, and you are making it more powerful than you
Yes.
in that moment by giving in to eating it. And it was really like, it was just interesting to me to think like, it's a fucking cookie. How is it more powerful than me? But you were absolutely right that in that moment, it was more powerful than me. And that was information for me of like, okay, so here is a huge crack or gap or hole that there are times where I am so disempowered that this inanimate cookie is more powerful than me. And that was a reality at times. And like, what does that mean? How do you engage with that? What do you like? Where do you even go from there of like, how do you have a conversation with somebody of like, yeah, sometimes cookies are more powerful than me. And it's going to sound like a joke, but to engage, to actually engage with that was a very real thing that happened, that I left my body and was like possessed by fucking Oreo cookies. Like,
Right. Yeah.
how do you get out of that? How do you, what's the conversation you have with yourself? How do you engage differently where you want the cookie and it's sitting on the counter and you're not eating it and it gets more and more painful and more painful. And if you just had the thing, you would stop feeling this way. But then
Yeah.
there's a cycle where you need to keep having the thing to stop feeling that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
How do you drop into how did you say before? You feel it to heal it? Like
Yeah. Feel it to heal it. Yeah.
how do you drop into that? And it's going to be uncomfortable. And like, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, that was just taken from my own lessons. Like, I'd come home after a day of work and I just plow down on a container of Haagen-Dazs and I'm like,
Yeah.
what's going on here? And I mean, I couldn't control myself, right? And so it's just the powerlessness. But again, like you said, it's just information.
Yeah.
And once I figured out a bit of that dynamic, I could actually just breathe, and just that impulse was always representative of a deeper emotional charge within me that I just was not aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And once I could step back from that and become more aware of what the impulse was, then that's what you allow yourself to do, right? But okay, so I got a question here from a viewer, and Brian DeCastro.
How are ya?
How's it going? With all the COVID trauma happening right now, how would one person know there is something to even be concerned about if they are at home and isolated from others? What are some signs and symptoms?
First of all, being at home alone and isolated is a concern in general.
Yeah,
People need some sort of engagement, even if you can't get out. Like you, Dave, you're talking about writing, just journaling, like engaging with something else. I feel like COVID is bringing out a lot of people's trauma that existed before COVID, and this has like blown the lid off of.
yeah,
Um, there is a small demographic of people who get hyper polarized in like two different ends of COVID perspectives.
yeah, for
And to
sure.
me, to have such a like laser focused one track mind in either regard, to me, is it's not about COVID. It's something else needed an outlet, and you're picking this sort of thing.
Yep,
So
I
that's not.
agree. That's a very good point for
Yeah.
sure. I think,
Yeah, if you can't have a rational, level-headed conversation, regardless of your perspective, like you should be able to listen to somebody's perspective and not have it fucking send you in a tailspin and
exactly.
destroy families and like there's something going on that was going on before COVID that is now
Yeah, COVID just brought it to the surface.
right
Yeah,
globally.
globally. Yeah,
So in regard to I guess that would kind of lead into Brian's question where, if you're isolated and at home, it may be exacerbating things that were existing beforehand that you're writing off as like, well, this is just like a COVID casualty kind of thing of like, because of COVID, I'm at home and isolated and feeling this way. Like, did you feel that way before COVID? Like, honestly, did you feel that way before COVID? And now, because you can't get away from it by going to work, going to school, going to see friends, is it just getting bigger? And being honest about the answers too. Like, it's not to say COVID is not traumatizing people itself. Like, there is that going on too. Just there's so much power in questions, and if you find that you're hitting a wall, or like you ask a question and you get to like an I don't know, or oh, just because, that's some part of your mind trying to protect yourself. Like,
right.
there's always another. Anyone who has a toddler knows that there's always another question that can come.
Yeah,
There's no end to the line of questioning that can happen. It just gets difficult with ourselves, where if you notice yourself getting caught in your questioning, that may be where you could start to work in and engage. I don't know if you have anything, Dave.
So the way I read the question, with all the COVID trauma happening right now, how would one person know if there is even something to be concerned about? To me, that sounds like is almost, is COVID even real? The way it's worded, I'm not sure. But as you said in the beginning, there's polarizing camps. One side is polarizing to I'm so terrified of losing myself or my loved ones that I will do whatever anyone asks of me to make sure that doesn't happen, regardless of whether that's true or not. And then the other side is polarizing so much into you're trying to control me, you're trying to take away my freedom. And those are the fears that each side has to face.
Yeah, and I'm going to do whatever I can
Yeah,
against what you're saying.
exactly.
You don't have control over me. Yeah.
Right. And so the way I see it is the COVID is actually a separate issue that causes the rising of those two fears on either side.
For sure.
And to manage it is actually each side's responsibility to cope and deal with their own fear and know when their own fear is getting out of control.
For sure.
Or not.
And not like, and the focus has been on, I'm right, you're wrong.
Exactly.
I'm right, and it's lost. Like,
that's the problem right there. And everyone who's afraid of having their freedoms taken away goes and marches out on the street, and they don't realize that everyone who is afraid of losing a loved one, they don't realize that that's making them more afraid.
Right.
And everyone who's afraid of losing a loved one then starts to become more afraid of all these people marching on the street. And so because they're more afraid,
we don't want you like in
yeah.
public.
So then what that happens is because they come before afraid, then they start to enact more tougher laws to get those people under control.
Right.
And all the people that were afraid of losing their freedom, not coincidentally enough, because that's how the mechanism works, is they're manifesting a reality where they're being controlled,
Sure.
and it's all on them, and they think it's the other group.
Yeah.
And so it just goes back and forth. Whenever, like we said before, you always think it's about someone else or something else.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what's arising within you. So no matter whether you think COVID is real or not, or serious or not, you just have to pay attention to what's arising within you as a response to that, and know whether that's getting control of you or not. And I think that's what, like on an individual level, that's mostly what most people can do. I mean, this is such a big picture thing. It's not one individual that can go out and change the world, right? Like each person has to deal with their own shit. And so looking at it from that way, if you see it from that perspective, it becomes more about this event that is causing fears to arise, so you can purify and purge and elevate yourself in vibration relative to that event. So I don't know. That's kind of how I see the whole thing. I don't know if that helps or not, Brian, but there we go. Okay, so let's move on. Unless there's anything else you wanted to talk about where people get stuck on their healing journey.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So greater purpose. We talked about this at the beginning because it is relative to where you're at in your journey, and not if someone had told me when I was going through my depression that there's purpose and a reason for it, I would have given them the finger and said, go fuck yourself.
Absolutely.
Because that's not where I was at in my journey. But now having the hindsight, and the pendulum is not very swinging too far to either side, you get a little bit more clarity, and you can see, at least for me, the reasons why you don't always know why until later, right? Hindsight is always 20/20.
Absolutely.
But when you're in it, you don't know why. And maybe you shouldn't really focus on the why.
Right. You might not subscribe to the idea that there should be a why, or that there
but for anyone that's at their part of their process, or just even general interest, can you maybe talk about, is there a spiritual reason for why we go through what we go through, or like why does bad shit happen? I mean, it's about sort of a deep philosophical question, right? Why do people have to experience pain and suffering?
Right. Yeah. So this is going to get into, I guess, my own personal views and feelings of different things. I'm trying to think. There was a rapper, like it was either Tupac or DMX or somebody, but it was something like, to live is to suffer. Or maybe it wasn't a rapper and it was actually some philosopher, but it was something like, to live is to suffer, but to thrive or something is to find meaning in the suffering.
Right.
Something along those lines. I'm not recalling who said it. In my mind, it's Tupac, but it could have been like Gandhi. I'm not sure. But, so for myself, I definitely subscribe to the idea of there being purpose or meaning to things happening, and where we can kind of get stuck is if we're assigning them as being good or bad, positive or negative. All of that stuff can be equated to whose side of the story you're hearing. So something like, oh man, it's tricky to say it out loud because I'm like, I don't want to piss people off. You'd take an example of something like 9/11. Whose side of the event are you getting? If you speak to North Americans, we're going to have a narrative of what that event meant and symbolized. And if you speak to people who were the ones hijacking the aircraft and who sent them, they're going to have a very different version of what happened that day and why and its purpose. And then it can get very, like, I have my beliefs and my feelings about it, and I do not think it was a good event or served a positive purpose, just to clarify that.
Right.
I also cannot ignore the fact that that is not true for somebody else. And there's a bigger picture happening than just my perspective of the world. And that's true for every possible thing. So I don't get enjoyment or joy out of hearing about or learning of people experiencing pain and suffering. At the same time, I have a very limited perspective of, if we're returning to that conversation about something bigger than me,
Yeah.
what are the universe, I have such a limited perspective of the bigger picture of what's going on that how do I know? Like somebody who experiences the loss of a loved one that then sends them to go get checked out in a hospital and saves their life, and you know, to decide to decide a purpose of someone else's life, you know, if you weren't ready to lose them, but you know, if they had more to offer you, like if their gifts to offer you being alive had reached its limit, and all the gifts they had left for you, you could only get after they left the physical plane. Like we can't really know those things. Like it's just too unknown. Like how different of a world do we have now after 9/11? The world we're going to have after COVID, and like different things that are happening too. Like, you know, COVID happened and scientists all over the world banded together to try and figure something out and like stop what they were doing on other projects to like try and help with this one project, and like the amount of people throwing money at it for the vaccines and stuff. Like whether you believe in the vaccines or COVID or not, I'm just speaking about the specific example. What other time has that much of the world come together for a common goal where it wasn't a rat race of we're going to do it first and we're going to charge you out the asshole for it? Like what other time has that ever happened? And it's unfortunate. It is so unfortunate, the amount of lives being lost for like this positive of people coming together, or like the world uniting in a way that it hasn't before. Like, and COVID's not done. It's not a complete story. It's not COVID is this one singular event that existed at this time. Like it is one thread in a greater tapestry. Like it's like putting 5 pieces of a 50,000 puzzle together and trying to be like, oh, I know the whole picture. You fucking have no idea. You have no fucking clue what this is, and you're not actually going to even be alive when the puzzle's finished. So yeah, I feel like that was a tangent.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, like you said, you can't really see the future and how this is all going to play out with COVID specifically, but there's going to be, I think you can, if you can apply the microcosm to the macrocosm, like use that theory that what happens on an individual level can also happen on a collective level.
Yeah.
If you can just look at growth in general from an individual perspective, there's usually a bit of pain before growth, right? Just growing pains, whether it's physical, like you're growing physically, or if it's emotional pain that's being released, you grow. And as a species, I think maybe this is sort of the first of probably many collective tests we're going to go through that's going to cause collective purging and purification and us facing our fears. And either we rise above that and unite, or we divide and we fall apart, and the next species, like cockroaches or raccoons or whatever, they take place. Going back just to the individual level, like we were talking about earlier, be authentic with where you're at. And if you're not at the place where you can accept a reason for this happening, then that's fine. All I can speak from is again, sort of my own process. And that what I've witnessed is there is a growth process happening. This is where we have to dive into the spiritual and the soul perspective and identity. I think a lot of pain revolves around identity and who you think you are, right, as a person. And the fact that you even think you're a person is part of the problem, because we are so much more than that. I mean, if we really connect to our spirit and our soul, you can experience yourself as more than just your physical self, which I have done and went through a phase during my sort of awakening between 2010 and 2012. I was floating above my body, looking down at it like 6 nights out of 7 for about a period of 2 years. And it just blew my mind off every definition of what I thought, who I thought I was, and what I thought I was about.
Right.
And so from a spiritual perspective, if you are all that is, playing yourself as an individual person, but you've forgotten that, there has to sort of be a mechanism to help you rebalance and get in touch with that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is part of the process that I think in general, pain and suffering plays in our life, as long as we have the tools to process and help heal and overcome. Every time you overcome your pain or your suffering,
Yeah.
you become more of who you are truly, not
Yeah.
just the individual self, but the greater self.
For sure.
Moving those dark balls of energy of the negative emotions, getting those released from your body allows more mechanically, it just allows for more spirit to flow through you and into you and operate from that higher perspective, from that more loving perspective, but also from that more unified perspective.
Right.
And so as a process of soul evolution, whether you believe in past lives or incarnations or whatever, it's who knows, right? It's hard to say, but the more I've dealt with my shit on a personal level, every time I come out elevated and more connected and more dialed into soul, more dialed into spirit, more dialed into the true nature of who I am. And I'm not even like points of a percentage complete on the way of my journey, but I just know relative to where I was, it's just part of a greater process of transformation, of just reconnecting with your spiritual self. And for me, opening myself up to that spiritual part of the journey was a huge part of my process.
Mm-hmm.
If I had not been able to open myself to the idea that I was just more than myself or my identity, and that's why I talk about identity as I think pain and suffering helps knock you out of your identity, because your identity is really tied to your ego.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in a lot of pain and suffering, sometimes that's what causes the ego to crack. It's like the hammer cracks your ego, the hammer of pain cracks your ego, and finally you just open up. And when you're at your worst, you're just like when I was at my worst, I was like suicidal at one point, and I was just like, all right, fuck, I give up. Like I just give up, like totally and completely. Like for me, it was just a moment of surrender. Like I don't have the answers. I don't know who I am. I don't know what the fuck's going on. Just
Jesus, take the wheel.
It wasn't really Jesus in that sense, but it was just because I still have some religious issues from when I grew up.
Yeah.
But that spiritual part of it, I think, if I just look at how things over time occurred and manifested, that some of the reason I could at least see some of the reason for why. But like I said, I couldn't see the reason in the time.
Right.
I wouldn't have helped at the time. I just had to express and purge and express and just feel it to heal it, kind of thing. But now that I look back, you can kind of see the reason a little bit. It's like there is something happening, but you're not always aware of it.
Yeah.
When you're going through it.
Yeah. I can definitely resonate with what you're saying, and I think, or feel for myself, some of the people that I perceive to have caused the most harm to me have also been my greatest teachers and my greatest gifts. Like some of the worst shit that has happened in my life, I can't even begin to describe the gratitude I have for it now, because the life I'm creating now is like tenfold over tenfold over tenfold better than where I was heading.
Yeah.
And I would have, had I not been cracked open, like you're saying, the way that I was, I would have just continued that way, never questioning or considering that there was another option. Like if it didn't get as bad as it got, I would have just kept going.
Right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I just think, as we said before, there's just so much more that we carry within us that we're not aware of when we're born on a soul level, but also society and cultural levels. I think the external events, because I do believe in resonance. I know people call it the law of attraction, but I don't know if that's the best term for it, but all life is vibration and frequency. And we have so many more vibrations and frequencies that we are putting out to the universe that we are not aware of.
For sure.
We actually manifest, in a way, some of the events or all of the events that happen in our life. But if we think it's not us, it becomes problematic. But because that from that vibrational level, whatever's happening on the outside is reflective of what's going on the inside. That's
sure.
where you have to look to find the answers.
Yeah.
And so there is sort of there's a mechanism behind it with resonance and frequency, at least I believe. And that may not be for everybody, but
right.
You know, so anyways, yeah. So maybe let's just talk quickly about what you just said there, where you have gratitude for some of the events that happened in the past.
Right. And a big part of, I don't know if this is relevant to tie in now, but we had mentioned about forgiveness.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to ask. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The gratitude is a big piece of the forgiveness, and not necessarily just the people in my life, but like myself too, for like forgiving myself for that whole, I think there's like a saying for like, forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know when you didn't know it, or however that goes. I'm not sure where to go with it, but what just came to my mind. So my boyfriend had told me a story about working with his own therapist, and I feel like he would be okay with me sharing, but talking about letting the person off the hook in regard to forgiveness. So if you are on like a fish hook and the person that you're upset with is on the hook in front of you, you cannot get off the hook until you let them off the hook. And it's not about letting anybody get away with anything. It's like, you have to let them go so that you can then let yourself go. And that's a big part of it for myself. Like going through the separation and divorce, like if I stayed angry, I would never have been able to move on and create and attract, like you're saying, the things that I'm attracting now, because I still would have been angry. Like,
yeah.
Am I okay with what happened? Like, yeah, it fucking sucked. Like, it was brutal. At the same time, like, I am the best version of myself now. And that was a key ingredient in the recipe. And a big part of that also was like not staying angry, like letting people off the hook for, they're having their own life experience and it's not personal. Like everything that happened, as much as I initially thought it had something to do with me, it had nothing to do with me. Like,
right.
It had absolutely nothing to do with me. And to hold on to this idea that it somehow did, like you're talking about with the identity and the pain and suffering, if I held on to this idea that it had something to do with me, I would have been creating my own pain and suffering, thinking that it was about me, but it wasn't. So the pain of feeling not enough, or that I was doing something wrong, or that I wasn't a good person, or any of these other horrible things that I was taking on and allowing myself to believe, like, until I could realize it's not about me. And just because somebody's saying these things about you, like, let them off the hook. And again, not getting away with it. Like, forgiving somebody is, like, you hear it so many times, forgiving somebody is not being, you're not condoning what happened. It's just,
exactly,
you're not bringing it with you where you're going. So where I'm going in my life, there's no room for that shit. Like, it just,
yeah,
you're trying to shoot me down in the sky. The arrows that you're shooting don't even reach the elevation of where I'm at. Like, shoot all the arrows you want. Like, they do not reach here. But if I keep lowering myself so that your arrows can hit me, like, I'm living a subpar existence from what I know I'm capable of and what's out there for me.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, is there actually a thing of forgiveness, or is it just you've learned your lessons and you've let go of what you've had to, and you've just sort of elevated your state of being to a point where you just can't go down there anymore?
Yeah, I feel like forgiveness is definitely a key that gets you through a doorway to go up. Like, if you're not willing to I don't even know if let go is the right word, but if you're not willing to forgive people for having their own experience of life, take it personally, like, you're not going to be able to move beyond it either. Like, that same way, like my ex-husband, if I didn't let him off the fish hook in front of me, I could not ever get myself off. I can't bypass him to get off this hook. Like, I had to let him go first, to be able to let myself go. Yeah. And that's not easy, especially if you feel like you have been so harmed and so wronged. There's a podcast that I listen to, and And he had kind of said, like, if you perceive that someone has wronged you, and like, you did this and you did this and I'm the bigger person, then be the bigger person. Like, they need to apologize, they need to do this, and da 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 da. Like, I'm not wrong, they're wrong, I'm the better person. Then be the better person. If you actually think you are, then be the better person. And what would a better person do in that situation? Not all of these other things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fantastic for sure. So, I mean, in terms of forgiveness, do you have to keep someone in your life who's hurt you just because you've forgiven them?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, there doesn't have to be like a reconciliation, or like, it could just be, the way you were saying before, I've made peace with this thing. And because even like, even if the person is not in your life, but they're taking up residence in your head, they're in your life.
You're still in your, you're still tethered to them for sure.
Yeah. Like, they're just as present as if they're standing in your living room. So just because you're not upset about what happened anymore or feeling anger about it does not mean you need to invite it back. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so what about forgiveness of self then? How would you help someone come to a point where they can do that? Because that can be a barrier for a lot of people, right? They can let others sort of be fine with that, but they just can't stop self-punishing themselves, or they're always in the constant self-blame, or.
Yeah, I feel like a big piece of that would be the, devilifying yourself. Like, when we're talking about the different vices or addictions and stuff, like, remove the villainy from these things and recognize that it was you doing the best you could in that moment. And like, sure, now in this particular state of mind or position of clarity, would you make a different decision? Sure. In that moment, you could not. You were not 34-year-old Amy who is grounded and feeling good in that particular moment. I was 4-year-old Amy who left her teddy bear on a train and no one could understand me through my hysterical crying that I needed the bear. They wanted to get the fuck off the train because there's a huge lineup behind us. Like, was I wrong because I was 4 years old and couldn't communicate that my bear wasn't? No, I was 4 years old. So these things live in us now. So we vilify them or crucify ourselves because, like, oh, you're an adult, like, you should do this. Sure. But in that specific moment, you were not.
Yeah.
Would you, and some people would, but like, would you go to an upset child and be like, oh, you fucking idiot? Why did you do that? Like, couldn't you make a different decision? Like,
yeah,
most people would not. That's not how they would engage with a child, but that's exactly what we do with those inner child parts of ourselves who are like coming up to be heard or wanting to communicate something, where, there's a point in time where we got frozen in some particular area of how we would process or deal with something. And yeah, our bodies and other parts of our mind continued to grow. But in this one specific area, we remained 4 years old until we are able to have experience and things to like catch up different parts. Like, it's not level across the entire thing.
Yep. Yeah. I think it just, in general, learning and knowing when your triggers are coming up, and when they come up, especially if they're directed, the triggers are directed at self, is just learning to be kind with yourself and just learning to be compassionate with yourself. In terms of facilitating the self-forgiveness process. Because I know for at least for me, that was probably one of the hardest barriers, is just I was always so hard on myself for things. I could just not let them go over time. I would just keep self-punishing myself over and over. So yeah, just learning self-kindness.
Yeah. If you could have done differently or could have done better, you would have. Exactly.
Yeah. Just learning to appreciate yourself, and even give yourself a pat on the back every once in a while. It can really help. Okay. So do you have anything else you want to say about that, or are you pretty good?
Nothing that is coming to mind. No.
Okay. So I think that's fantastic for today. So we covered a lot of stuff. It's been an hour and a half, so I guess before we go off, for anyone who's watching this now or in the future, is there a way people can connect with you, like through your website or anything like that?
Yeah. So my website, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
You can find me on Facebook or Instagram. It's Spiritual Counselor Amy. And then my website is Amy DiMarino, which, let's see, over here.
Yeah.
So all one word, amydmarino.com. That would take you to my website, which would then link you to my Facebook and Instagram if you can't find it there. That would be like if somebody felt they wanted to reach out or contact, that you could message on any of those platforms, and it'll either come to my email or the message inbox is there.
All right, fantastic. So yeah, thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
We will be able to do some again, and maybe more with our viewer Brian DeCastro.
Yeah, awesome.
If you're still there. Okay, so thank you everyone for watching, and until next time.